Hello, my name is Alexis. Tonight I am giving a brief visual representation regarding prosecution having too much power. This is a two-sided debate, and we will go over both sides of the prosecutors regarding their power. So, do prosecutors have too much power? Well, some may ask, what exactly is a prosecutor? A prosecutor is basically a lawyer. They represent local, state, and federal government. They work against the alleged criminals, and they are opposed by the defense attorney because the defense attorney is a lawyer who represents the alleged criminal. Now, as far as the courtroom itself, the prosecutor would be this lady right here in the black and white. This is the judge up here. This would be the defendant or the person who is facing the charges, and this would be his defense attorney who would be defending him against the prosecutor presenting the case to the judge. There is also typically a bailiff in the courtroom. The bailiff is a police officer who is now assigned court duty. And depending on how far along you are in the court proceeding, there are typically witnesses as well. Now, what power do prosecutors have? Prosecutors have all the power. Prosecutors decide what is going to be charged and who they are going to charge it with. Along with that, they also have the capability to upgrade or downgrade a defendant's charge. Now, by upgrade or downgrade, I mean that somebody who is charged with a petty theft, which is a misdemeanor, typically you end up on probation or maybe a short jail sentence, the prosecutor can upgrade the charge, and now the charge would be a felony theft, which typically leads to prison time. Now, by downgrading the charge, that would be taking something like a capital murder, which is punishable by life, and turning it into a simple manslaughter, which typically is followed by a probation sentence or maybe light jail time as well. Now, typically, prosecutors make this determination by whether the defendant is cooperating with them or not. If the defendant is cooperating with them, that is typically when they take the more serious charge, like a capital murder, and turn it into a manslaughter. Now, if the defendant is not cooperating with prosecutors, they will typically try to upgrade the charge to a more serious charge in hopes of scaring them into cooperating with them and giving them more information either against themselves or against other people involved with the charge. Now, on top of the charges, they also control grand jury proceedings, like the grand jury selection they sit in on and things of that nature. Now, they also work with other attorneys, especially public defenders, because public defenders are hired by the state. Even though a public defender is less or more a defense attorney, they are hired by the state, so they work hand in hand with the prosecutors usually, which is why people tell you to get a paid defense attorney. Now, the wrongdoing of prosecutors and why I feel they do have too much power is because they do coerce the defendant by making those threats about upgrading their charges or saying that if they don't take the plea, they will get sentenced to a higher charge when they go to trial, or a longer sentence when they go to trial. They typically act as the judge, the jury, and even the executioner. Now, with this being said, as far as the coercion and acting as the judge, jury, and executioner, 90% of federal trials end up pleading guilty before the conclusion of the trial, and 95% of state trials plead guilty before the conclusion of the trial. Now, some may seem like this is right, but since 1989, over 1,500 exonerations have happened. And what an exoneration is when they go back to court and somebody finds that they were not actually guilty of the crime that was being charged. and 10% of those had actually pleaded guilty. So that's 10% of over 1,500 people pleaded guilty and then were later found that they were not actually guilty. Aaron Schwartz is an example. He was 26, charged with computer fraud. They offered him 6 months if he pleaded guilty, or told him they would serve 7 years mandatory. He ended up committing suicide. Kevin Ring is another example of prosecution having too much power. They charged him with a lobbying scandal. He went to trial and was sentenced to 2 years after prosecutors recommended that he be sentenced with that amount. Meanwhile, the head of the scheme, the ringleader, pleaded guilty and they only sentenced him to 4 years, again, because he cooperated with prosecution. Now, on the right side of the prosecution, they do have a duty to use their power to protect citizens. They do try to lower the murder rate by using gun laws to persuade people not to use the guns, like the convicted felons or people who are not licensed to carry. Judges do make the final ruling, which is just based off of the prosecution and the defense attorney's information. And the prosecutor does try their best to prove beyond reasonable doubt that the person is correctly charged with this. And there is my citations, 6 of them. Thank you for viewing.